He's about 455 yards away. He's going to hit about a 2-iron, I think.
This is the School of Motion podcast. Come for the Mograph, stay for the puns.
I know what it feels like to be sitting at home and you have that urge, like you want to make stuff and you're trying to make stuff and maybe you do make stuff and it's just not there. There's something not clicking for you. You're looking at other people's work and you're like, why isn't my stuff as cool as that guy's stuff? Like, I want to make that stuff. I can see where you're coming from. And I know that that's a really frustrating place. I'm trying to help people essentially kind of rewire themselves, at least like to get to the point where they have that foundation that will allow them to start growing in the right direction.
Quick note. In this episode, we discuss a site called Mographnet and lament the fact that it doesn't exist anymore. Well, shortly after recording this episode, the site actually came back to life, thanks to some heroics from Zach Lovett, episode 18's guest. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now, let's talk about something that is pretty difficult to discuss: design. First off, design is a gargantuan topic. It can also be a little vague and undefined, feels subjective, and there's just so many angles to consider when talking about it. Well, my guest on this episode is a master at talking about and critiquing design. Carey Smith has made a name for himself in the industry as a truly gifted teacher and even had Motionographer dub one of his lessons, quote, the best tutorial ever. And frankly, I'm inclined to agree. Carey's videos are not at all like other tutorials, and I have learned boatloads from them. In this episode, Carey and I reminisce about the heyday of Mographnet, recently resurrected, which was both of our old stomping grounds on the internet. We dig into design theory and how to really level up your skills in that arena, and we talk about Carey's ability to teach design in a one-of-a-kind format that nobody else seems to have figured out. He's incredibly well spoken about this stuff, and I think you're going to get a ton of practical tips out of this episode. Before we dig in, real quick, let's hear from one of our amazing alumni.
Hello, my name is Shaun Robinson. I live in Gainesville, Florida, and I've taken the animation boot camp from the School of Motion. What I've gotten from this course is a plethora of knowledge. Joey takes you through the ins and outs of animation and shows you the fundamentals, and that's something I didn't have. I didn't know much, if not anything, about animation before I started the course. The training helped my career tenfold. I went from thinking about animation and wanting to do animation to, after I've taken the course, and doing freelance work and having a lot better understanding of animation and the principles. I would recommend this course to anybody and everybody who wants to learn animation. My name is Shaun Robinson, and I am a proud School of Motion graduate.
Carey, old buddy, it is very, very nice to have you on the School of Motion podcast. Thank you for doing this, taking time out of your busy schedule with your new puppy.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's all day puppy scratches, just scratching butts all day long, and watching dogs poop.
I mean, someone's got to do it. It's a living, right?
You know what, Joey? Surprisingly, it's not. It doesn't pay that well.
Oh shoot! All right. Well, this interview started off on the wrong foot. So why don't we start here? I think a lot of people listening right now are familiar with you because of the incredible video courses that you've produced. And if not, we're going to be linking to those in the show notes. So hopefully everyone by the end of this will be really excited to go check those out. But I'd love to hear, and I don't even know if I actually know this story. How long have you been doing Mograph or motion design, and how did you get into this field?
Should I start with when I was born, or
if you were doing motion design that far back, I would say yes, you should start that.
No, I mean, I did. I kind of started out in illustration, not professionally, but it's like when you're a teenager, the stuff you're interested in, it's like comic books and that. Well, for me anyway. So I thought I was going to be a comic book illustrator. And then I realized that I wasn't very good. So I kind of, decided that for me. And somewhere in maybe when I want to say I didn't find it until I was 20, I found out about graphic design. It was just wait a minute, you mean all those billboards and print ads and stuff, they don't just like appear out of nowhere. People actually make those. And, found like all the tools, Photoshop, just got really obsessed with that and decided, I was actually at University of Oregon getting a biology degree at the time, which is, I know, completely pointless. Like I'm studying neuroscience and genetics, and that's about as far from anything that I do now as possible. And so I just, I spent all my time like just trying to get done with my homework so that I could draw or make stuff on the computer. And finally just realized, after I graduated, I'm like, I want to get good at this, but I'm not getting good fast enough. And so I went to Cal Arts, and I was there for 3 years, and I graduated in 2003. And after that, it's kind of strange because I had fallen in love with motion, animation stuff while I was there. I'm still scratching this puppy's butt, by the way. And it's going to need to happen, or there's going to be some whining. And really, when I fell in love with it, it was like, I'd love to be able to do this, but I don't know how. And I just kind of lucked into the fact that a couple of my first jobs were doing motion graphics related stuff. And from there, I just kind of somehow hung in. And all the jobs that I got from then on pretty much were in the Mograph realm, although I don't think anybody was really using that term then. But it was sort of the Wild West. And so somebody like me who had, zero experience could actually get a job and do okay. And that's basically how I got into it. And then I got a puppy. What do you know?
Yeah, yada, 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 got a puppy. So let me ask you this. Looking at your work, if anyone listening goes to division05.com, you can see Carey's work. And, it seems like mostly what you do is boards. And you have a super strong sense of design. And that's kind of the focus of most of the video lessons that you've done. Did that come from Cal Arts, or did you sort of develop that once you started working?
Yeah, I mean, my interest originally was in design. And I think of animation as kind of just like another form of design, right? It's got its principles, but you're also trying you're trying to solve problems and communicate things with it. So it's all kind of part and parcel of the same thing for me. And now I forgot the question that you just asked because I was so intent on making sure that I scratched that puppy's butt perfectly.
Well, what I was asking. This is gonna be a Hall of Fame interview. So I was asking. I wish I had a puppy.
Oh man, I'm gonna make you jealous.
Right now, I don't have one here. So I'll scratch my own butt.
Oh, that's sweet.
Where did you pick up your design skills? Like, was that, what did school kind of give that to you, or did you have to develop that professionally?
Yeah, I mean, the program that I was in was graphic design. So it was mostly, it was a print oriented curriculum. And basically that kind of gives you the foundation of thinking about and making things that communicate visually, that are beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, so they're attractive enough for somebody to actually look at long enough to get something out of it. And I can't necessarily say that Cal Arts' focus was on making beautiful stuff, but they did a really good job of helping us understand how to make messages for people, because that's really the meat of what you end up doing, right? You want to make something compelling, and I think that because of that intense focus, I ended up basically having an interest in the kind of concepting, creative, and making side of motion graphics when I got into it, as opposed to the production side, which I'm not very good at. And so, I love animating, but my core skill set is really in design, which is kind of why, obviously why the videos that I make are really design oriented. And I try to make sure that my focus is on that so that people can come to my stuff looking for specifically that. Like if they want to author something, then my stuff is going to be better suited to that kind of interest than, I don't know. I can't come up with any examples. Maybe your guys' stuff. I actually have never seen any of your boot camps. I don't know. Do you guys focus more on, I know you have like an animation boot camp and you have a design boot camp, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So do you have like technical education as part of that? Or is it all theory? What's the structure of that stuff?
Sure. So currently the only design specific class that we have is design boot camp. And that's taught by my buddy, Mike Frederick, who's actually, he was my art director when I was running a studio in Boston. He's one of the best designers I've ever worked with. And it's interesting to bring him up because his work and his style of design is a lot like yours.
Oh.
It doesn't look like, simple flat shapes and illustrations and stuff like that. He's like a Photoshop ninja, kind of like you, that is a very good designer that can also mock up absolutely anything in Photoshop and create these really cinematic, cool frames with depth and that communicate well. Anyway, so to answer your question, that class focuses on kind of all of the above. It's mostly design principles, like we do a lesson on, composition, and we go over some of the rules, and then you're given a challenge. And along the way, you're learning a lot of like Photoshop tricks and things like that too. But to me, it's interesting because you were talking about, at Cal Arts, it sounds like you learned a little bit more of the functional part of design than the form part, and getting back to the idea of like, you need to think conceptually and have something to say before you open up Photoshop and start making stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, so I guess what became really apparent is, and back when I was there, we talked a lot about that idea of form versus function, and people were having that argument of form versus function, which gets old after a while. But what I think I really came out of it with is the idea that the form and the function they're inextricable. They're exactly the same thing, right? Like you can't have any function without the form, and you can't have any form that doesn't have some kind of function, right? Even if it's on such like a super subtle level. So
right.
So our training was really in thinking about those two things as one thing. Like at the end of the day, if you spent all day making something and it's like, I don't know, let's just say it's like a drawing, or maybe it's an animation or something, like it has a form, right? And in the end, if somebody watches it, if they're engaged enough, then clearly they're going to try to make some kind of meaning out of it. Hopefully it has some meaning, but in the end, you can't extract the function from the form. You can't pull them apart and have them exist separately. So that was kind of the crux, at least for me. I'm sure everybody came out of it with something different, but at least for me, that was kind of the message, is like, there is no form versus function, right? Which is, again, like I said, like something we always talk about. But yeah, I've had that discussion with other students from other schools, and they're like, the function's more important, the form's more important. I'm like on the sidelines going like, let's all, can't we all just get along? It's like it's the same thing.
Right. It's 50. Well, it's, see, I agree with you that you can't have one without the other, really. But I can just tell you personally that the few times that, I've tried to pretend like play designer, I remember, like, for example, when I was freelancing a bunch of years ago, and I was at a studio where I was 99% of the time just animating someone else's designs, which that's kind of what I was good at. And but then they were in a bind one day, and they needed another designer. I was like, oh, let me take a crack at it. And I approached design, because I didn't know any better, from form first. I had this cool looking thing in my head that I just put down in Photoshop and, bashed it together and made this cool looking thing, and then showed it to the art director. And he looked at me and he's like, that doesn't work at all for what we need this to do. Yeah. And so the best designers I've worked with always approached it from function first, form second. Right. And I don't know, maybe there's different ways to do it, but in my experience, that seems to work a little better, for me, for sure, but it seems like for most people. And I'm curious what you think about that, Carey, because to me, when I taught at Ringling, that was probably the most common issue that I saw with designs from students that were new to it, was that they wanted to use Octane or something, and that's why they did that design, not because they thought about it and had a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, so it's such an interesting industry, I think, or a medium, because so many people get into it by way of having access to the tools, right? Like, you've got your computer at home, and maybe you decide to get a copy of Photoshop, or you get a subscription to After Effects or something, and you find it and you play with it, and it's empowering, right? So that feels good, and you enjoy the outcome of it, and it's like something you've never been able to do before. And I find that a lot of people's reaction to that, and it certainly was mine, was like, so that's what this is you play with the tool, and it empowers you. So design, kind of becomes about the tool. And so then when a lot of people go into the design process, they turn on Photoshop or they turn on After Effects, and they go, what can I do in After Effects? Like, should I make a square? I'm going to make a square. What should I do with that square? I'll twist it. And then it's like, I'll put a glow on it. It's like, okay, well, but yeah, if you really want to design something, clearly you have to start with a reason, basically, right? You have to start with a goal of some kind. And that goal is going to get refined over the course of however long you're working on it. But that has to be the driver for what you're making. So before you even... And it's like the cliche, right? It's like before you even turn on After Effects, you kind of have to sit down and go, well, what is it that I'm trying to do? And there's that moment that you just sort of have to take the time before you get too excited about working with your favorite, like Octane material or whatever, where you go, okay, well, what is it that I need to do? And figure that out. And then you can sort of start thinking about what it is that you can make that's going to accomplish that goal. And I mean, it sounds really stupid, and it's like everybody says this stuff, but even me, like, I still have a tendency to be like, oh man, there's something I really I kind of want to, like, I've been learning Fusion 360 lately, right? And I just started a project with a good friend of mine. And it has specific needs, and I haven't fully explored the needs of that project yet. And so, of course, in my head, I'm like, how can I figure out a way to do this where I can use Fusion 360 and make some dope hard surface, model? And it's like, I know that that's just going to lead utterly to disappointment, because I'm just going to, I'm going to be halfway through that process and just go, what the fuck am I doing?
Well, I mean, I just heard, it's funny. I was just listening to Ash Thorpe's podcast, and I think he was talking to Albert Omos, who, he does like really crazy, like cool animations and stuff like that. And he was talking about this, and I thought it was an interesting way of looking at it, that when you're doing client work, it's usually a bad idea to do what you just said, to try and shoehorn the technique you want to use, into the idea, or actually it's vice versa, shoehorn an idea into the technique you want to use. But when you're doing your own personal stuff, that works really well.
Yeah. It can.
And so I wonder if maybe, you can kind of have both, but I think if you're doing client work where it needs to be super art directable and creative directable, you I don't know, maybe doing the idea first before the technique is the way to go.
So I guess so I don't remember. Did you watch you watched the Snapdragon video that I did, right? That like 3 hour monstrous. Okay. So or was it 4 hours? No, it was 3 hours. So that video was basically the exploration of that kind of process. It was like, it was a project that started out as a client-driven project. And then I decided to take it off into another direction for myself, just because I was interested in the imagery. And it kind of had both elements of letting it be a goal-driven project versus trying to find ways to shoehorn stuff in that I just wanted to make. Right. It's like, I want to make this thing. How can I make it relevant to the project? And, sometimes that works, and it certainly is enjoyable, because then you get to satisfy that itch in the back of your head. It's like, I want to make that. Right. And that sounded creepy the way that I did that. And then in Style and Strategy, the video that I did just this past year, it was really the client-driven process where you have to sit down and go, okay, what is it that they need? What needs to come out of this? And then discover how to achieve that goal. And so it's interesting watching it come from both directions. In Snapdragon, which is the sort of more organic, like I'm going to try to shoehorn my stuff in there. You reach a point where you go, I don't know why I just made this. Like, I'm not sure that I didn't just waste like 5 hours of my own time. Right. And so, it's like that discussion it was interesting for me in that video because the discussion, it's very real. Like everybody gets themselves into that knot. And it's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to like throw this work away, or do I just plow ahead and like cross my fingers and hope it works? Because it almost never does. But if you have a certain set of strategies that you can fall back on, you can kind of fix those sorts of problems. Because again, like even me, I've been doing this for a long time, and I will still stumble over my own feet trying to get to the point where like I can just make the cool thing that I wanted to make, as opposed to like the thing that, actually needed to make for the audience to get something out of it.
That's what I love about your videos, Carey, is that you really do show, you show sort of like the very honest, I guess, situation that designers are in, which is create something from nothing on demand. Here you go. And having a framework to do that is super helpful. Yeah. And one of the things that I remember from, I think it was in Snapdragon. And by the way, everybody should definitely go check out these courses. They're amazing. In Snapdragon, you talked about this concept of, I can't remember what you called it. You were basically you used the example of a Polaroid, I think. And you said, let's pretend you have a design that needs a Polaroid in it, or it needs to feel like a Polaroid. Well, you could show a picture of a Polaroid. That's one way to do it. But there's also sort of these visual identifiers that you relate to a Polaroid. And, and when you said it, this light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, that like opens up this whole new universe of design. So did that kind of stuff, where did those kind of insights like come from?
Some of that stuff came from my schooling, where they were really trying to get across the idea that, so that idea that you're talking about, I called it visual signifiers, right? So, little bits of information that can come in any kind of form. Maybe it's a texture that a person can look at and go, that feels a certain way, or it reminds me of something, or like I know that that's concrete, or I know that that's plaster on a wall, and it means something to them, even on just like the most basic level. Like they know it's plaster on a wall. Visual signifiers are really interesting because, you can take like that example of the Polaroid photo, which was just a completely random example. You can pull anything and have this discussion about it. Like the Polaroid, it's like, it's got all these specific things about it that tell you that it's a Polaroid. It's like the aspect ratio of it, that white border, the fading, like little dirt marks tell you that it's been sitting in the sleeve of an old photo album. All this stuff is really important in terms of how people gather meaning. So the way that they actually decode, this sounds really pretentious for some reason. It sounds like I'm a science professor giving a lecture on
Yeah, but you're scratching a dog's butt while you're doing it, so it's fine.
Yeah. It's otherwise entertained right now. But the way that, I talk a lot about how people's brains work because it's actually really, really important in terms of perception and how people decode messages and read the stuff that you're making. When somebody looks at a Polaroid, it's like, it's faster than you can even realize. Like they figure out that it's a Polaroid picture before you can even say Polaroid, like before you can even say, it's so fast. And to be able to understand that all those various qualities are being read by a given person's brain in like fractions of a second is really important, because otherwise you wouldn't even realize that it's all those like little elements, all those little qualities that are important to conveying that idea of it's a Polaroid. Or, like the fact that you could, let's say like you're in Octane, right? And you're fiddling with some material. It's like all that little fiddling actually goes into conveying certain things to your audience, right? That's why you do that fiddling. That's why you change something from highly specular to really rough, because it changes the quality of it in a way that people are going to read, and they're going to understand something slightly different. It's going to look different. They're going to feel something different. So that stuff is really important. And I think that I started to pick that idea up at school, and it's not an idea that you can really like drill into your head until you just worked with it a ton, like looked at a lot of stuff, try to make a lot of stuff, see what the effect is of changing this little subtle nuance versus that. And so it's kind of taken me my whole career to really figure out how to talk about it then, because, it's not a concept that I think people who are used to, again, like going, starting off in After Effects and going like, should I make a square? It's like those two approaches of thinking about it are so far apart from each other, that it's hard to introduce those ideas, but it's really, really important and really powerful, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys talk about this in your boot camps, if you talk about those kind of issues, but it's like when people find out about it, like you said, it's like a little light switch goes off in your head. You're like, wait a minute, that's right. I knew this all along. Now I just have to work with it.
Yeah, we don't talk about it the same way you do. I mean, I think the way that it sort of shows up in design boot camp is when we talk about mood boards, because it's kind of, you kind of pick, there's always a message, right? Like if you're doing client work, there is some sort of message, like, Red Bull is cool could be the message, or, or like, our couches are 50% off this weekend could be the message,
that's deep.
Right?
That's deep.
Yeah, really. But then there's also kind of the tone and the vibe that you're trying to evoke. And that's what I kind of got out of that little message in Snapdragon is, because a lot of times, when I would start out trying to design things before I knew better, it was always like, well, this looks cooler if it's grungy. Right. And I had no idea why. It just was cool. Right. But then like, if it was grungy and the brand was, like Target or something, maybe that didn't make sense. Yeah. Right? Like maybe that's not what, it's not appropriate. Yeah. But if it's for, like the UFC or something, then maybe there's a reason that makes sense. So that, yeah.
Right. And what is that reason, right? Like why grungy for you? What's grungy about, like, do you see, are the fighters covered in dirt when they're fighting? Like they're not, so why would that reference make sense? What is it about it? So it's like the nuances of those signifiers. What do they mean? I mean, that's like now you're getting into like psychology and stuff, right? Like why do people associate these two things together? What is it that makes something cool? Right. And there's like, a million different kinds of cool. Why do you want this cool versus that cool? And I think that once you really start to dive into what's cool about something, and really you can like decode and get critical about what makes it cool, then, oh my God, you're like a super powered designer at that point, where you can like start inventing your own cool. And then you become somebody who has, a personal artistic voice that people will identify with you. It becomes super valuable. You basically become a rock star, and, you live in a huge mansion up in the hills. I don't know what happens. I haven't gotten there yet.
Puppies love scratching butts.
Puppies make you scratch their butts and take them out to go poop. And that's the life, right?
It's funny that I think you're totally right that there is this element of psychology and I don't know if I didn't go to design school, so I don't know if they teach psychology in schools like that, but it actually seems like it'd be a pretty important thing. I mean, thinking about it, like, let's say you needed to, if you were doing boards for something that is supposed to make the viewer feel uneasy. It's a promo for a horror film or something like that.
Right.
You can reach for tropes that you've seen before, but if you understand psychology, maybe you can be a little more clever, right?
Yeah, well, it's really like, so when you talk to, or you talk about, say, writers, right? Like, you sort of imagine, okay, well, you need to know, if you're going to write, say, a book or a screenplay or something, you need to know how to put words together. All right, well, great. But, being able to construct a sentence doesn't make you a good writer. So what is it about that makes for good writing? And it's like, how do you actually study the process of storytelling, and why is storytelling so powerful? Why is it so powerful for people specifically, humans? It's not like, dogs are telling each other, because I'm looking at a dog. It's not like dogs are telling each other stories. It's like, it's a uniquely human thing. And there's something about our psychology that makes that incredibly powerful. So, there is a huge element of psychology if you really want to get into it. And it really helps. It's like a really deep subject, right? Because you're communicating to people. So there's a lot of stuff that you'd have to figure out and learn if you really wanted to get, if you really wanted to make that powerful for you. But even just starting somewhere and starting to understand that, the whole point isn't just to dial in the coolest octane render. It's like, well, why is it cool, right? Like, do you want it shiny or rough? Okay, well, it's an arbitrary decision unless you know why you're doing it and why rough would be more interesting in this case, right? So it's like figuring out, just having that introduction to the idea of visual signifiers in and of itself is really powerful. And I think, for a lot of people, excuse me, phlegma, for a lot of people who haven't gone through design school, which I think is most people, since a lot of people are, again, introduced to this just by having the tools and kind of like getting interested in being able to make the stuff, that might be a kind of revolutionary concept. Although I think on some level, we all kind of already know that it's the case, right? Like, it makes sense. But it's so powerful. You know what? I'm rambling. I don't even know what I was talking about at the beginning of this, but it's so powerful.
Well, it's all good. See, you're really good at kind of talking about these things in a way that's understandable. And the first time, so it's interesting when I don't remember what it was, one of your videos, it might've been the one on composition. So everyone listening, Carey's got a bunch of free videos on his YouTube channel. We'll link to those. They're also amazing and they're free. The paid ones are even better, so you should pay for them. But you did one on, I don't know, it was composition or something like that. And I watched it and I realized, oh my gosh, this is Binky from Mographnet. And I remember reading, because you would basically do the written version of what we're doing now on that forum all the time for people like, who were basically asking for critique on their work. And so let's talk about Mographnet a little bit, actually. So let's go there. Okay.
The 4chan of motion graphics.
It's a very appropriate metaphor. So for anyone listening who did not come into this industry, I came into it in 2003, so the same as you. But for someone coming into it right now, there is no more Mographnet. Can you talk a little bit about what that forum was for the industry?
Oh, can we have a moment of silence? No, I'm kidding. So, I mean, it really was sort of, so this guy, Mark, I guess, I think that he set it up before I had graduated. And I think that he had set it up just as like a repository for a bunch of cool stuff that he found. And it was, he set it up on like a web forum foundation. So eventually, there were people who were signing up and could talk about the stuff, and it just became, for whatever reason, it just became the hub for everybody who was in motion graphics at that point. It was not a bit. I mean, this isn't really that long ago. 15 years on the scale of things isn't that long, but that's like just a clue as to how young this industry really is. Like, there weren't that many people in motion graphics, and So it was basically like, the Wild West, essentially. It was like, hey, let's look and talk about work and take a crap on each other's, animations or whatever. And I think that, through being somebody who was kind of on the sidelines for a while, just reading other people's reactions to stuff, I just started to realize that the perspective that I had on the work was a little bit different, and I just had this like compulsion to try to explain why things were to myself. So I would literally like look at someone's work, and I would sit there for a while with it, replaying it, and try to almost vocalize why something was or wasn't working, because I was desperate to learn. And there's just something about my brain in particular where the way that I learn the best is to try to like, I pretend that I'm explaining it to someone else. Really, I'm just explaining it to myself, and I just will continue to refine that explanation until I go, okay, that feels right, and I think I get it now. So Mograph is really this place where I wasn't like invited to critique on people's work. People would just, put their work up, and I was doing it for myself anyway. And I'm like, this comment that I just figured out for myself, this comment might help this person. And so, for some reason, I guess that propensity towards explaining stuff to myself and wanting to help other people just kind of like, I kind of made myself a name on this, very small site, of being the guy who would actually give like really thoughtful critiques of people's work. And so I don't know. It's funny to me to hear you say Binky, because there was such a random like, web name that you pick out, just because like some other name that you wanted was taken at the time. I couldn't have Carey or whatever. So that hung out with me for quite a while. I was known as Binky.
It really is sad to me that it's not, that the site's down now. And I don't know if it will ever come back up, because it really is, for anyone getting into the industry now, and you see like some amazing thing Gmonk just did. Well, you used to be able to go search for Gmonk on Mographnet and find his posts from 2005 or something, and David Lewandowski and a lot of people whose names you've heard of were
right
on there. And at the time, everyone was just figuring out how the hell this whole thing worked. I remember the reason that I ended up there was because there was no YouTube and there was no Grayscale Gorilla or Vimeo. So if I saw some cool thing that Shiloh did or MK12, I didn't know technically how they did it, and that was really the only way was to go on there and ask, how did someone do that? But the danger was that by posting anything on that message board, you might get bitch slapped really hard. You might get crapped on by multiple people. I'm curious. I'd love to hear your opinion on this, because your critiques never had that tone. You were always like super positive and respectful and honest and blunt. But it was done, sort of with like a firm hand, but like a soft hand, right? And
it was mindful of people's feelings,
Yeah. But that site, for whatever reason, mostly had this other kind of undertone to it, that kind of would keep the newbies kind of quiet and afraid. And I remember posting stuff on there that rightfully so deserved to be knocked around. But I would be like terrified. I was like shivering, waiting for comments. And I'm curious, that attitude doesn't really exist in the motion design world much anymore. I mean, on Twitter a little bit, but that sort of really harsh, blunt criticism seems to have gone away. And I'm curious if you think that was like helpful, that was the tone, because I can imagine positives to that too, and not just negatives.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's almost like just different styles in people's in learning, right? Some people want to have their ass handed to them. They want to get flipped over, right? And some people are like, please give it to me gently, right? Or I don't even want to know. And there's something to be said for, either side of that. I mean, I don't even want to know is maybe you just shouldn't show your work to other people because
right.
you're gonna see their reaction to it at some point, right? There's gonna be some level of disappointment or elation or whatever because you're gonna see how they react to it. But I think that some people who come for a critique are. They're the way that they learn is to have someone shouting at them.
Yeah.
Right. It's like going into the army or something and you need to have somebody screaming at you just to like get it into your head. I'm not like that. I don't want to get punched in the mouth because I said the wrong thing. And so my reaction to people, in their honest requests for help was like, to give them help the way that I would want it, which is to be mindful of their feelings and to also explain when I say something like, I'm not going to just say like, yo, dog, your shit sucks. Right. like what are they going to do with that? That's just basically a big no without an explanation as to why. And so, if I'm going to identify something that's a problem with whatever they've made, maybe it's like the pacing of their reel or whatever, which was always an issue for people. I'm going to try to explain why something else will work better or why thinking about X or Y is going to help them. And I find that in general, I think most people respond fairly well to it. Again, there are some people who just maybe they need to be screamed at. And so that doesn't work so well for them, but that just wasn't my style. So I think there were other people there on the site who could kind of fill that void where I wasn't really able to.
Yeah. It's interesting though, looking at what exists now, Twitter and Reddit and social media and sites like that, where there's definitely this phenomenon, I think, of people sort of fishing for likes and for positive reinforcement. And it's so easy to get that now because, saying you like something is like one mouse click. It's like really cheap, but giving someone critique is kind of a pain in the ass still.
Yeah. I actually tried to give some people critique on Reddit, and this is like a while ago before I'd realized it was a bad idea. They just, it was like, that's not what they were looking for. They were just looking for positive affirmation. They were looking for praise. Right. And it's like, they weren't there to learn. So I didn't get that. I was coming from like the Mograph mindset or the school mindset or like the let's all help each other get better mindset. And they're coming from the, Instagram likes mindset, like you're saying. And so I just, I got downvoted into oblivion. They're like, why would you, it's like, why would you say that? It's like, well, I mean, it's true. I mean, I don't think I said anything untrue and I didn't say it in an unkind way, but dang, dude, like, I thought we were here to learn. They're like, no.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if a Mographnet could exist today in the environment that is the modern internet. People have so many places that they can go for quick and easy dopamine hits and positive feedback that to actually get, to go on this message board essentially and get some pretty harsh, even if it's true, some pretty harsh words. And it's interesting too, because I don't spend a ton of time on mixed parts, but it's sort of become a little bit of a successor, I think, to Mograph.net, but a very different tone. I think it's a lot friendlier in general, I'll say.
Yeah,
but there's
very respectful.
Yeah, but there is still like a little bit of I think you've done some critiques on there, haven't you?
I think I joined Mixed Parts like in the middle of last year, and they were right at the middle of trying to figure out whether they were going to survive or not.
Right.
And so basically the bulk of the discussion was like, how are we going to keep this alive? Are we going to keep this alive? And so I was like, let me just, before I get super invested in this, like, it's like, I don't want to get a cat and then it immediately dies, right?
You don't want your heart broken twice together.
I don't want to fall in love with this and then watch it crash. So I haven't actually, thanks for reminding me. I haven't been back. I need to check that out. If there's discussion going on there, that's great, because I think that there is a certain set of people out there who they really are looking to learn. And I think that the only way that you can learn is to be able to accept, when people give you suggestion, that you don't take it like a personal rejection. I mean, it might feel like that, but you can't operate on that level constantly. Like
Right.
you have to be able to go, interesting. All right, let me take a shot at that and I'll get back to you, as opposed to just like moving on to the next, praiseworthy comment, which doesn't really get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think, you're right. Like, I think that there's absolutely a place for that discussion, and that there really needs to be, but there has to be a culture shift, like that, just like there's been a culture shift towards the, getting likes and doing dailies in a public setting so that you can get exposure, like that's sort of become more of the focus for, I think, a lot of people. And you can still make progress that way, but I think it's going to be a lot slower because you're not allowing other people to help your learning process. So you're right. I mean, I think that we really do need those places for people who want that kind of feedback, and it absolutely doesn't have to hurt. You don't need to have the dentist doesn't need to drill through your entire mouth to like get you healthy and bright and clean. Like, you know what I mean? You don't have to come out of there bleeding from every hole in your body.
Easier way. Yeah.
There's an easier way. Exactly.
It's such a terrible mental image.
Oh God.
Yeah. So I mean, in all of our classes, we give critique to students. I mean, every single one of our classes that has teaching assistants and stuff, there's critique, and our tone has always been like really friendly and inclusive. And I don't think anyone on our team would give sort of mean-spirited critique, but I think it is really important to get honest feedback, because when you get into the client world, especially if you start working with like ad agencies and people like that, you're gonna get crapped on sometimes, and you're gonna have an art director tell you that like you just wasted your time and I need this redone tomorrow and stuff like that. And you have to kind of get inoculated to that. It's you are not your work.
Yeah, you're telling me.
Yeah.
I've had those. I mean, everybody has those moments. Like, you're not going to have a sparkling, clear, crystal, perfect career. It's going to be fraught with bumps and mistakes, and you're going to take your licks. And I don't even know if it's about taking your licks. It's like, in the end, who is this stuff for? The stuff that you're making, who's it for? Is it just for you? Because if it's just for you, why are you showing other people?
Right.
Clearly, it's for other people. So you have to take them into account when you're making this stuff. And if they're telling you, yeah, bruh, I don't know, man, like this part kind of sucks, right. That's really important. And of course, it helps if they know what they're talking about and they can explain why they don't think it works. And that's where your colleagues are really, really important to how you educate yourself. But man, holy cow, if you are just a child of like doing daily renders and putting them up on Instagram and checking how many likes you got, oh man, is it going to hurt when you try to do a paid job and actually make a career out of it? Whew. It's
going to be quite a...
Your butt cheeks are going to be red, let me tell you.
Rude awakening. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you've been in this industry as long as I have, and it's interesting to sort of start to feel a little bit old. Been in the industry 15 years.
Amazing how that happened.
And a lot has changed, but that's probably, to me, I think the most obvious change is just the way we get, I guess, positive reinforcement has totally changed. It used to be you would slave over your reel and you'd put it on Mographnet and you would just cross your fingers.
Right.
And you would hope, and it was great because there was even that rating system where it was like a 1, a 2, or a 3.
Right. Yeah. It was like the Oscars for people who did what we did back then. I got a star.
And then Ted Gore would put his new reel up and you just like, I quit.
Yeah, son of a bitch.
But now, it's interesting. There's conversations now that I see online of people saying, are reels even relevant anymore? Because, everyone's posting 30-second clips to Instagram, or, they're doing things that are just going to run on Facebook or something, or it's like in an app. So I'm curious, because the kind of design that you have in your portfolio still feels like the kind of design that was happening, in the early 2000s and up till probably like 2008, 2009 was like the heyday of that stuff. Has that stuff changed your career at all in terms of the way you get clients and the kind of work you're doing?
I mean, the way that I mean, I'm kind of, I'm still doing lots of, well, I wouldn't say lots, but I'm still doing jobs. Like I still am investing in the design side of my career. And I'm, at the same time, obviously, like these videos take a shitload of time to make. So I'm kind of trying to figure out if I can, make enough money to actually support that endeavor and keep doing these. But, again, I forgot your question. I'm really gonna
let's dig into that a little bit. Actually, I want to talk to you about the video. So, I think you started. I looked on YouTube, and I think your first video was like a series on how to make a good reel or something like that.
Yeah.
I actually used to recommend it to students when I was teaching at Ringling because it was so good. So, I think you did that about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You put it on YouTube, and those videos, I think they don't look at quite as labor intensive as the newer ones that you've been doing,
right.
But they still look like they took a ton of time.
Right. Yeah, they did. I mean, I was really figuring out, I'm still figuring out how to make them because you evolve as you continue to work on something. But, that one about the reel, like that was the first thing that I had ever made in that sense. Like I had never done voiceover. Like that's terrifying to put your voice, like record it and put it on the internet. Like, I hadn't written a script for it. I just basically made an outline. I put the whole thing together. I worked really hard on making the actual reel and trying to come up with topics that I thought were important to discuss. And I look at it now and I'm just like, okay, well, there's good information in here, but all I can focus on is like the fact that, I sound really nasally or I sound like I'm mumbling or what, it's hard to watch.
Well, so for people listening who have not seen any of these videos, the way Carey makes these videos, it's not at all like a traditional tutorial. It's not, hey, Joey here from School of Motion and then just me screen sharing for 40 minutes. It's not that. It's I think I described it once as like if, Werner Herzog made a Mographnet documentary about something.
Oh my God.
It's like you've made a film and especially the last two, you've scripted them out. There's voiceover, there's like cuts. I mean, it's crazy how produced they are. I'm curious why you chose that format. Like, how'd you arrive at that?
Well, I mean, when I did that first one about making a reel, I was like, okay, well, I've been, again, on Mographnet pretty much for like the last 10 years or something, trying to impart this information to people. And I was like, what I should do is instead of repeating myself over and over and over, because a lot of people tend to have the same issues when they first try to start making their reel. And I was like, why don't I just codify this information? I could either write it down or what would be, imagine this, really appropriate, I should make a video because it's about making videos, right? So I put it together over the course of, I think it took me like 4 weeks or something. And it's I look at it now and it's a shit show, but it really, the whole endeavor was to try to convey to people that hadn't really worked on this kind of thing before, that essentially you're making a short film, right? Like you're making something for people to watch. It's not a slideshow. People hate slideshows, right? And it's not just a document of your work. Like people don't want a resume. It's not that interesting. And especially in the context of motion graphics, you're trying to show that you're good at this stuff. So maybe the way that you do it should be good, right? It's like you're trying to convince people, hey, I make videos for a living. Here's a video to show you how I do that. Well, that video should probably be pretty good, right? Right? As opposed to a slideshow of other stuff that might be good. And so in my own effort to make, this is getting meta, but in my own effort to make a video about people making videos about their videos, right? I was like, this should probably be pretty good, right? And I should think about this as a kind of film. And that first effort, not the best, but I did more and I got better. I guess I'll let you be the judge of that. But yeah, by the second one, I think that I kind of started to realize like, oh yeah, I'm making, if these are going to be like 25 minutes long, I better make it have an arc. I better start it out. I better pepper it with some interesting side bits. Maybe there's some dumb jokes because that's my disposition. And at the end, there better be a sense of completion. It's like you better go on a journey from start to finish. And it's like, hey, what did you just do? You just made a film, Carey. Like that's, it's 25 minutes. The production value is really low because it's all me. I'm sitting in my underwear at home making this thing. But, in the end, somebody who's going to watch the whole thing is going to be, like, they're going to need to get pulled through. Again, it's like that psychology of storytelling is what's really powerful for people. So, I set it up as not like the duck went to the store and then like this happened. That'd be a really cool story, by the way. But just that somebody needs to be able to get invested in it, to see. There has to be a kind of in a certain abstract sense, there's got to be a plot. There's got to be some charisma to it. Something. Yeah. It's like, and so, yeah, when you say that it's not the same thing as your normal tutorial, which I think of essentially as a step-by-step recipe that somebody with a droning voice goes through for you while their mouse cursor flies around the screen. It's like, that is absolutely not what I'm interested in making. And I wouldn't be good at that anyway. I'm not a technical person. So, yeah, when you said Werner Herzog, I was like, I don't know if that's good or not. That doesn't sound good. Like, that dude is morose, but yeah, I get it. And if I'm understanding you right, then thanks. That's really sweet of you to say.
Yeah, I meant it as a compliment, but maybe I should have picked somebody else. I don't know. Well, I remember at one point Motionographer ran an article about one of your videos, and the title of it was "The Best Tutorial Ever." Oh man! And it's interesting because as soon as I saw it, I can't remember which one. It was probably the composition one. I think was the first one I really watched.
It was the storyboarding one that they did the article about, and then I went and did the composition one, which is probably
maybe it was the storyboarding one. But I remember watching it and thinking like, and at that time I had started making tutorials, and I thought, I like what I'm doing is like the kindergarten version of what Carey's doing, and so for a while,
just like, baby.
I did this whole series where I tried to kind of do what you were doing, and I scripted things out and edited it and made it a lot more fast paced. And I'm sure they're more entertaining for the people watching them, but dear God, they're so labor intensive.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Really and not just labor intensive, like mentally taxing. What am I going to show when I'm saying this line? What am I going to show? It's like editing, like a video. You're editing a full on like TV show. Yeah. Basically. So how do you balance the workload of doing those things with, I assume puppies got to eat, paying the bill?
Well, this puppy's only been around for, what did I get him last Sunday? So it's a week and a half. So it wasn't really a concern for me when I was making the last one, but essentially the only reason that I'm able to do these videos at all, because, I don't charge a lot for them. So they're not a huge moneymaker, but I've had a few jobs in the past where I was able to sock away a little bit of money. So I'm basically just living off of savings. And I decided to do that just as I negotiated with myself. I was like, okay, look, this isn't going to be a money-making venture for, maybe ever. And hopefully at some point, I can develop like a stable business around it where I can actually support myself off of it. But I'm basically just going to have to invest the time up front, just like you did, right? Like you couldn't possibly have been supporting yourself for, I don't even know how long it took, but you got there. And I'm, again, without like marketing and stuff, I'm not anywhere near where I would have to be able to do this like absolutely full time. But I live a really spare life. It's not super expensive. I don't have 3 kids. So yeah, that's what I hear. This like having a dog, it's like, now it's like being a single parent, but not on the level of, like 3 kids in a house. It's like I live in an apartment. I live, with a puppy. So I'm able to kind of live without working for stretches at a time, as long as I don't get too extravagant. And that's really the only way that I've been able to keep making these videos. I assume that's how Werner Herzog does it. So I'm just following his model.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and you do this in Los Angeles, which that's another amazing thing, because that's, there's probably only 2 or 3 more expensive places that
oh my God. Yeah, it's getting nasty here. Holy cow.
So are you still like freelance and doing design for studios and stuff like that, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, right now I'm supposed to be working on a project, like I think I mentioned earlier, with a good friend of mine, and we're just, we're doing like some branding stuff for a show that I guess I can't technically say what it is, but NDAs, aren't you so sweet?
Fun. So much fun.
And I basically just I'll take jobs. I mean, they come at me and I'll sort of turn down a lot of them because I want to keep investing my time in making these videos. Like I'm writing a series of shorter episodes right now. So we'll see how long it takes me to get through to the point where I can start releasing them. But effectively, I'm just taking jobs that sort of fit my schedule when I can, just to kind of keep myself afloat. And hopefully at some point, I've got enough content that's good that people really want that I can maybe just break even and keep it going. Like maybe then it becomes self-sustaining. And, people keep asking me that question of like, are you going to make another video? Are you going to make another video? And I'm like, I'd love to. I've got ideas for them, and I know that there's a lot of content to talk about. But yeah, it's just that thing of like, I don't know how long I can afford to like, and sit in this apartment.
Dog food ain't free.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask you this. I got a couple more questions for you. As someone in the industry about as long as you've been, and as someone who transitioned from client work to teaching online, I'm just curious what sort of motivating you to make this transition.
I don't know if this will sound cheesy or not, but honestly, like I know what it feels like to be sitting at home or wherever, and you have that urge, like you want to make stuff. And you're trying to make stuff, and maybe you do make stuff, and it's just not there. Like you're just not, there's something not clicking for you. You're looking at other people's work and you're like, why isn't my stuff as cool as that guy's stuff? Like I want to make that stuff. And in the current climate of, people entering into the industry because they got a hold of the tools, right? And that's kind of like their that's sort of the basis of their understanding of design or animation, right? It's like everybody's kind of coming in from this whole thing a little backwards, and I just have this feeling like it's the same thing that I kind of had when I was critiquing people's work on, say, Mographnet or something. It's like I can see where you're coming from. And I know that that's a really frustrating place. And even when it's fun, there's a moment where you just go, damn it, like, why isn't my stuff as cool? And you think that you have ideas in your head and you want them to come out and you want to make that stuff. And it's so unsatisfying. And so I'm trying to help people essentially kind of rewire themselves, at least in part, to get to the point where they have that foundation that will allow them to start growing in the right direction. It's like a lot of people basically just started out on a path that's really fraught with a lot of problems and doesn't lead anywhere satisfying. And I just kind of want to help them. I just want to nudge them over to this path where they're going to be like, oh, wait, I can actually see like the light at the end of the tunnel here. You know what I mean?
It's a good feeling. Yeah. Yeah. And so if someone's like, pretty new to this industry. And I think a lot of people listening probably feel that way. I still feel that way most of the time.
Me
like,
too.
It's like you have an idea. It's like that idea of the gap. I think the Ira Glass quote, you've got taste, which is why you're attracted to motion design.
Yes.
Taste far exceeds your ability and you don't know why.
Yes.
What advice would you give someone, in that situation at the beginning of their Mograph journey?
Oh my God, Joey, that's such a big question. Like,
you have 1 minute, go.
Oh, here we go. All right. So, it really is, again, like I was saying, it's about that foundation that you lay for yourself, right? And that very, very common misstep of coming into it, just starting off on the wrong path, right? Like it's not necessarily the wrong path. It's just a path that's going to cause you a lot of problems down the road, and it's going to lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. And you want that, like that's what you're looking for, is the satisfaction of making something really cool. You know what that feels like, right? When you've just whipped out something that is it's just dope, right? Like it just feels good. And I think that the content that I've been making is really aiming to help people do exactly that. Like people who like say you're, I don't know, 23 or something, 20, and you've kind of been playing around with this stuff and you're emulating other artists and you don't really have your own personal voice. I mean, that's something that I talked a lot about in Style and Strategy, kind of how to develop or start developing your personal voice. It's like, that's really, as dry as that is, considering how easy it is to go watch a 10-minute tutorial on how to make like, a shiny chrome, whatever, like, thing. That it's really attractive to be able to do that, to have that immediate feedback of, I watched a 10-minute video, that was easy. Now I just follow the steps and I've got that same cool thing, right? And you feel a certain sense of accomplishment, but it's really waning, right? It's that same dopamine hit of, getting the likes or whatever, because as soon as you realize like it didn't really come from you, it came from the fact that you had the same tool that the other guy had. And that guy showed you how to literally make the exact same thing that he did, right? So the I guess it's I don't want to say it's the higher path, I guess, right? It's a little harder, right? It's harder to walk. It takes longer, but the end result of that journey, I'm really like talking in metaphors here, but
bring it home. Love it.
The end result of that journey is like you're standing on top of the mountain and you can see the other mountains. Oh man, I really feel like I'm like standing at the pulpit now, but yeah, that's where the real satisfaction comes. And I know that that's what everyone who wants to do this stuff is really looking for. Like they have stuff inside of them that they want to express, or they like the craft. They just like making things. And in the end, you want to have something that other people appreciate. And what other people appreciate is something compelling. They appreciate things like storytelling. They appreciate having things communicated to them. Things that are compelling are, not just look at that glow. Like, no, like your audience is not into the lens flare that you chose to put on there. Like that's the sad fact, right? Like they don't care. And the other side of that, and the other side of that is everyone else who does this can put that exact same lens flare on that. So like the only way that you're really going to make something satisfying that people connect with is to go on that somewhat longer journey of developing your own voice, like really becoming, I don't know if people think that this is like, an elitist term or something, but like really becoming an artist, right? Like that's when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I thought that calling myself an artist was like, it felt kind of disgusting, right? Like I was just like, I like drawing comic book characters. Like I'm not an artist, and that idea of artist had like the fine artist thing, like the, snobbery of all that stuff. But it's like, you realize it, for anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, clearly you're interested in this stuff enough. You're an artist. Like that's what you are. And it took me a long time to realize that, but that's the case. And if you want to be in the arts, then it probably means that you want to make satisfying stuff. And if you want to make satisfying stuff, at some point you have to start going up the higher path, I guess, the harder path of developing things like personal voice, understanding things like storytelling, trying to make things that are actually compelling to other people. Because that's really the value of art, is in conveying stuff to other people, not just beauty, but, maybe beauty in all of its various forms. Again, like maybe it's something horrific. Maybe you are trying to compel someone to action. Maybe you're trying to make them laugh, who knows? Like there's all kinds of art out there, obviously. But to get there, you have to at some point step outside of that, that routine of I'm going to learn how to make the X particles whizzy thing. You know what a whizzy thing is, right? That's totally obvious.
Yeah.
You have to step outside of that at some point and start investing in the basics, right? The foundational stuff. Get some, maybe get some design history in you. Maybe get some foundational work with composition. Maybe start to understand storytelling. Because what we do is, I feel like I've been talking for like 20 minutes. What we do effectively in the end is we are storytellers, right? Regardless of whether you're making a 3-second animation that's just a lower third, you're conveying something to people. And for the most part, people pick up information, they learn things, and they're compelled by stuff that's in a story format. So you have a start, middle, and end, right? Even in like a lower third. Like I used to have to make that stuff. I've worked at like TV networks and whatnot. And it's like, yeah, you have an intro to it. You have a middle section where it conveys information, and then have an outro to it. It's like, yeah, in abstract, that's a little story, right? It's the foundation of communicating stuff to people. So it's all that kind of stuff, the basics of, storytelling, of composition, just to make something beautiful so that somebody's not like, disinterested in what you've made. Like all that stuff is really important, and it does take more effort. It takes more learning. But I think that, anybody who's listening to this clearly is invested enough to want to go down that path.
Mind blown. Head over to division05.com to check out Carey's work and to find all of his incredible video lessons. They'll be linked in the show notes, and seriously, go check them out. Also, check out the newly relaunched Mographnet. If you see Zach Lovett, buy him a beer because he is the reason the site is back up. But check it out. It's like a time capsule for motion design. I want to thank Carey for hanging out. And I want to thank you for listening to two grown men giggle about phlegm and dog butts for over an hour. And that's it. Until next time.